everybody, and welcome to another ASMR video here on the channel. Now we are back in the monk's outfit one last time, as tonight it is Halloween. This is the big one we've been counting down to. And tonight, I'm not going to ramble on in this intro, I'm just going to say Happy Halloween. And in this evening's video we have our longest ever video on the channel. 2 hours of no sleep Reddit scary stories. Really the perfect way to celebrate this Halloween, or to unwind after a night of festivities, I guess. So hopefully you all enjoyed the holiday, and let's get into the stories. We're beginning tonight's video with a Halloween themed story. It's titled In Deep Appalachia. Halloween night comes with rules. I've lived my entire life in a holler on the outskirts of Wyoming County, West Virginia, deep in the mountains of Appalachia. It's a place so remote, most folks don't even know it exists on a map. Just a handful of families and dense, unforgiving woods. This place doesn't have neighbourhoods, doesn't have sidewalks, and most definitely does not have trick-or-treaters on Halloween. Halloween isn't a holiday here, it's a test. My family and the others who've lived here long enough to know follow a set of rules on Halloween night. It's not tradition or superstition, it's survival. Those who didn't follow the rules didn't live long enough to tell anyone about it. Our rules aren't just about keeping doors locked or avoiding dark places. They're specific, with reasons rooted in events we do not talk about. My dad always said they came from my great-grandmother's time, when people came to these mountains from Scotland and still believed in the old ways. Whether it's spirits or something else that's out there, or things just too old to name, Halloween night here has always been a game of life and death, and each rule existed to give you just enough of an edge to make it through till morning. The first time I broke a rule, I learned why they exist, and I'll never forget it. Every October, around the second week, the rules went up on the fridge. We lived by them. My family took them seriously, and not just in a keep the kids safe kind of way. No, these rules were for everyone. Break one and you'd put us all in danger. Here's how they go. Number 1. If you hear 3 knocks at the door after sunset, do not answer. If you hear a single hard knock, open the door but do not look at who stands there. Hold out a basket of freshly baked bread and wait until you hear the footsteps leaving to shut the door. Number 3. If you hear someone call your name from the woods, do not answer. If you see a figure at the tree line wearing a wide-brimmed hat, do not look at him for longer than a second. Number 5. If you hear chains dragging on the ground, sprinkle salt on all windowsills and door thresholds within 1 minute. And if a candle is burning in the window of the old abandoned Anderson cabin up the hill, stay indoors no matter what. These rules didn't exist for no reason. They were handed down because of bad things had happened. People vanished, people died, and strange things occurred. That's just how it was. I remember one specific year, years back, when Halloween night fell on a full moon. The air felt different, charged. My dad had a sense for when things were going to be bad. could just feel it in the holler, thick in the air, like something breathing down your neck. Dad told us to get all the preparations done early. Salt the windows now, he instructed, standing by the door, his face tight with worry. We're not waiting for the chains. I followed his orders without question, pouring salt along each windowsill and at the front and back door thresholds. My brother was baking bread, already anticipating rule number 2, the one we hated the most. It was the one that forced us to interact with whatever knocked, whatever stood on the other side of the door. We never knew who or what it was, but we knew if you didn't offer bread or if you dared to look, it wouldn't be good. By late afternoon, the house was fortified. The bread was cooling on the counter, its smell filling the kitchen. The fire was lit, burning low, and a 12-gauge lay across Dad's lap like it always did on Halloween. Isaac, my younger brother, sat closest to the window, glancing out every now and then. We had about 3 hours before sunset. The rules were clear, everything bad happened after dark, but the waiting was the worst part. The longer we sat there, the more anxious we became. Did we use enough salt this year? Isaac asked quietly, but Dad didn't answer. He just stared into the fire, gripping the gun tighter. That was answer enough. The first knock came just after dark. A single knock, slow and deliberate. Isaac and I froze, staring at the door. Dad stood up, motioning for us to stay back and be quiet. I swallowed, hard, heart pounding in my chest. It was time to follow rule number 2. Without a word, Dad picked up the basket of bread on the counter, freshly baked, still warm. He walked to the door, resting one hand on the knob. "Remember," he said, his voice low and steady, "don't look." He opened the door just wide enough to slip the basket through the crack, his eyes focused on the floor. The warm smell of the bread wafted out, and I could hear a faint shuffling on the porch. Whoever or whatever it was, I saw a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow stretching across the porch, but I didn't dare look. Dad held the basket out, his hand shaking slightly. For a few heartbeats there was no sound, no movement, and then footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps retreating from the porch. He waited until they faded completely, then shut the door quietly, locking it tight. Isaac let out a breath. Why don't we just leave the bread out early? Why do we always have to wait for the knock? Dad's face was pale and his eyes were hard. We have to wait for the knock. If we don't answer, it'll come in. We thought it was over. We had followed rule 2 to the letter, and for a moment it seemed like things were quiet. But here, nothing stays quiet for long on Halloween. Isaac was the first to notice him. He was standing at the edge of the woods, just where the trees meet the clearing. He was tall and thin, a wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, but he was there, watching. Isaac gasped, pointing. "It's him," he whispered, voice trembling. Dad didn't need to ask who. He knew. We all did. The man in the hat. "Don't look at him," Dad snapped. Not for more than a second. I glanced just enough to confirm he was there. A tall, dark figure, almost blending into the shadows of the trees, but distinct enough to make my blood run cold. I looked away quickly, heart hammering in my chest. We got away from the doors and windows of the house and sat huddled in the living room. The fire our only light. Outside, the man in the hat stood at the tree line, unmoving as the night crept on. It wasn't until after midnight that we heard the chains. At first it was faint, a metallic clinking that seemed distant, almost like it could have been the wind. But it grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. The sound of chains being dragged across the rocky ground outside. Isaac's face turned pale. He shot me a look, wide-eyed and terrified. "The salt," he whispered. Dad nodded grimly. "Go check." I got up slowly, trying to control the tremor in my legs. I circled the house, inspecting every window and door frame. The salt lines were intact. Nothing had disturbed them. The chains continued to scrape outside, dragging closer and closer, but we didn't dare open the door. We didn't dare look. We stayed inside, sitting together in the flickering light of the fire, listening to the sound of the chains until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. We made it through the night. The man in the hat was gone. The chains had stopped. But as the morning light seeped through the shutters, I glanced toward the old Anderson cabin up the hill, and there it was. A single candle still burning in the window. The rules are clear. When the candle burns in the Anderson cabin, you stay inside. No exceptions, no excuses. Even with the sun beginning to shine and the birds beginning to chirp, the sight of that candle filled me with a primal fear. We have to wait until the candle goes out before we can go outside, before the night is truly over. And that's how it goes here. The rules aren't just there to be followed, they're there to keep you alive. And if you're smart, you don't ask questions. Sometimes it's better not to know. Halloween here had always been terrifying, but last year was different. It wasn't just the usual unease or the normal anxiety that came with the setting sun. It almost felt like the rules weren't enough anymore. My dad was getting older, his movements slower, his hands a little less steady. We all knew it, but no one said anything. We just followed the rules like always, hoping that would be enough. We spent the day in prep, salting the windows, baking the bread, the usual. Isaac and I were jittery, pacing around, double-checking everything. With my dad getting older, we felt a greater pressure to take it upon ourselves to prepare. The sky darkened faster than usual, clouds rolling in from the west, blotting out the last rays of the sun. By the time dusk fell, the fire was burning low and the house sat in darkness. Dad sat in his usual spot by the door, the shotgun across his lap. The basket of bread, fresh out of the oven, sat next to him. We all waited, our hearts pounding in the silence. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see the figure in the hat or hear the drag of chains. And then it came, a single knock, loud and deliberate. Dad stood up just like every other year. "Stay put," he muttered, picking up the basket with his trembling hands. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Isaac and I exchanged a nervous glance as Dad approached the door. As always, I stared at the floor, focusing on the sound of crackling fire, and trying to block out the sense of dread that had settled in my gut. He opened the door a crack, just enough to push the basket through, without seeing whatever waited on the other side. But this time, something went wrong. As Dad leaned forward, he knocked knocked the basket against the door frame and lost his grip. The bread tumbled out, scattering across the porch. The sudden movement, the noise. Without thinking, I looked up. I looked at it, and I saw it. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything I could name. It stood hunched over, far too tall to be human. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its skin pale and stretched tight over bones that jutted out at odd angles. Its face was sunken, like a skull, with pale white skin pulled tight over it, and its eyes were wild and wide, too wide, like it didn't have eyelids. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, a black gaping hole that emitted a horrible, deafening wail. It was a sound I had never heard before, like metal scraping against stone, except worse. It drilled into my skull, making my ears ring and my vision blur. Before I could react, before I could even scream, the thing lunged. Its bony hand shot out, grabbing my dad by the collar. In one quick motion it yanked him off the porch, dragging him toward the woods. The sound of his body scraping against the ground, his muffled cries, and the creature's horrible wail all blurred together into a scene of pure terror. Isaac screamed first. I was frozen, with my mind unable to comprehend what had just happened, but Isaac's scream jolted me back to reality. "Dad," Isaac yelled, bolting for the door. I followed, my legs shaking and my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. We ran into the cold night air toward the edge of the woods where we could still hear Dad's faint cries. But before we could take more than a few steps, I saw it. The candle. A single flickering light in the window of the old Anderson cabin. My blood ran cold. We had come outside when the candle was burning. I grabbed Isaac's arm, pulling him to a stop. "Wait," I whispered, voice shaking. "The cabin." As if on cue, the door of the cabin suddenly flew open with a loud crash, as if something unseen was about to come storming out. Something angry. Something that should not have been awakened. "We have to go," I shouted, dragging Isaac back toward our house. We scrambled inside, slamming the door shut behind us. I locked it, my hands trembling so badly I could barely turn the key. The shotgun was still on the floor by Dad's chair, but it felt useless. What good would it do against something like that? But the night was far from over. We huddled in the living room, terrified, waiting for the next rule to break. Isaac was crying, his hands shaking as he tried to steady his breathing. I stared at the door, half expecting something to come crashing through at any moment. The chains came next. We heard them clattering on the ground, dragging closer and closer. I grabbed the bag of salt, getting ready to double-check the lines of salt we had placed down earlier. The chains dragged right up to the front door, the metallic linking echoing in the silence. I could hear it just outside, scraping against the wooden steps of the porch. But I knew the salt would hold. It always did. Or so I thought. Isaac was the first to notice it. We had forgotten to re-salt the front door threshold after going outside. The wind from the open door had disturbed our salt line. Just as I was about to rush toward the door to re-salt it, I heard the chains and the creaking against the door. It sounded as though a heavy weight was slowly leaning against it. I knew we didn't have time. I began to back away, motioning to Isaac to go to the bedroom. Isaac screamed as the door burst open. We ran into the back bedroom, heart's pounding, breaths coming in ragged gasps. I quickly sauntered in front of the door to the bedroom and checked the windows. "It's in the house," I whispered. I could feel it. A presence, something cold and malevolent, creeping through the house towards us. I don't know how long we waited or how long we listened to the chains pacing back and forth through our house. Eventually we heard them go back outside. Slowly we left the bedroom and quietly closed and locked the front door. I placed a fresh line of salt in front of the door and breathed a sigh of relief. We were safe. For now. And then we heard it again. A knock. But not the single knock. And not the 3 knocks. This was something new. Something that didn't fit the rules. It was a rapid, frantic pounding as if whatever was out there wanted in. Immediately. My heart stopped. The rules didn't cover this. Isaac looked at me, eyes wide with terror. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. The pounding grew louder, more desperate. The windows rattled in their frames and the fire flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. Whatever was out there was angry. Angrier than anything I'd ever felt before. "We just wait," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise. "We wait until daylight." The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Every minute felt like an hour, every sound made my heart leap into my throat. We didn't sleep. We didn't dare move from the living room. We huddled together in front of the fire, clutching the shotgun like it was our last hope, and quietly crying over the loss of our father. The pounding on the door never stopped. The chains outside the house dragged back and forth. A constant reminder of the horror just waiting beyond the walls. And through it all, the candle in the Anderson cabin burned bright, flickering in the distance like a beacon of death. But somehow we made it. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, the sound stopped. The pounding ceased. The chains fell silent and the candle in the cabin flickered out. We had survived another year, barely, but Dad never came back. Halloween in Orla has always been a test, but last year it wasn't enough. Breaking the rules cost my dad his life and everything is different. And I can't shake the feeling that this Halloween will be worse. Story number 2 is titled, "My husband has been pushing me to let my sister be a surrogate for our baby, but doing it the traditional way." I stood in my kitchen staring out the window, my mind a million miles away. I couldn't take the tightness in my chest and the weight of what my husband had suggested to me. My husband David and I have been trying to have a baby for years, but our last visit to the hospital provided the final nails in the coffin after telling us that it wasn't ever going to happen. I was devastated, but my husband didn't seem too upset because he suggested we had options. I couldn't believe what he was asking of me. Not only me, but also my sister. When he first mentioned that we ask my sister to be a surrogate, it didn't come across as the worst idea. But when he suggested we do it the traditional way, it sent my blood running cold. A million thoughts ran through my head as I tried to make sense of what he said and wanted. Was he attracted to my sister all this time? Was he using this as a way to sleep with my sister guilt-free? I was furious, and when I said this to him, he didn't see the problem. Told me his ancestors have done it for centuries. I didn't answer him at first. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. It was as if David, the man I'd known surrogacy that upset me. It was the way he spoke about it like it was part of some long-forgotten tradition. He wasn't talking about clinics or doctors. He wanted Emily to conceive with him naturally. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My sister with my husband, to give us the child I couldn't have. The thought made me sick. David had been calm, almost too calm when he explained it. He said it was the family's way, something his ancestors had always done to keep the bloodline strong. The more he talked, the more I felt like I didn't even know him anymore. It wasn't just old-fashioned, it was disturbing. I tried to talk to Emily, hoping she'd be as horrified as I was. At first she thought it was a joke, but when I told her how serious David was, her face changed. She admitted that he'd already spoken to her about it. She had hoped he'd drop the idea if I wasn't on board. Now we both knew it wasn't going away. Anger burned in me. How could David even suggest this? The thought of him with Emily was unbearable, but there was something else too. Something darker lurking underneath his words. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his plan than just having a child. I started digging. I went through his things, looking for anything that might explain what was going on. That's when I found the old family records. At first, it seemed like harmless genealogy, but the deeper I looked, the stranger it got. There were symbols I didn't recognize, notes about bloodlines and fertility, and then I found something that chilled me to the bone. Mentions of rituals, sacrifices, and offerings to some kind of ancient god. Suddenly everything clicked into place. This wasn't about having a child. David wasn't just trying to keep the family line going. He was planning something far darker. My sister wasn't meant to just carry our baby. She was supposed to be a sacrifice, an offering to this old god his family had worshipped for generations. I felt sick. My mind raced as I pieced it all together. David had been planning this for years. His calm demeanour and the talk of tradition was all a cover for something far more sinister. I realised I wasn't just fighting to stop an uncomfortable surrogacy arrangement. I was fighting for my sister's life. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with that same eerie calm, saying it was the only way to secure the family's future. Emily had to be the one. She was pure, perfect for the ritual. He spoke like it was already decided, like I had no say in the matter. The desperation in me turned to panic, a gnawing fear that was eating away at me. I had to protect Emily, but I wasn't sure how obsessed my husband was about all this and the lengths he could go to make it happen. Time was running out, and I knew that if I didn't stop him, I'd lose Emily. And if that happened, the consequences would be far worse than anything I could have imagined. The night of the ritual came. David had prepared everything, symbols drawn on the floor, candles flickering in strange, unnatural patterns. Emily stood off to the side, trembling, terrified of what was about to happen. I was shaking too, but not out of fear. I was ready. David had no idea how much I had learned, how far I had gone to turn this around. He thought I was beaten, that I had accepted his plan. He had no idea that while he was busy obsessing over his precious old ways, I had been finding something older, something stronger. As David began the chant, my heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed silent, watching him call on forces he didn't fully understand. He moved toward Emily, ready to start the final part of the ritual, and that's when I made my move. I spoke words he wasn't expecting, words I'd learned from the darkest parts of those ancient texts. They weren't meant for me to say, but I had learned to twist the ritual, bend it to my own will. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, memorizing everything I needed to make sure that he would be the one who paid the price. David froze as the energy in the room shifted. The symbols on the floor flickered, changing shape, twisting into something unfamiliar even to him. His confidence wavered, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He tried to finish the chant, but the words fell flat. "You don't know what you're doing," he tried to shout. His control over the ritual was slipping. The power he'd summoned didn't care for tradition or purity. It was only looking for one thing: the perfect vessel. David gasped, his face twisted in shock. The ritual had shifted, and he was no longer the master of it. He tried to stand, but his body convulsed again, and he fell to his knees. His hands pressed against his belly as something inside him began to swell, pushing outward. The horrifying realization dawned on him. The life he had intended for my sister was now growing inside him. I watched as his belly expanding, stretching his skin tight. The weight of it grew, heavy and undeniable. He looked up at me, his face pale, desperate for a way out, but there was none. The spell had made its choice. David, the man so obsessed with controlling his bloodline, was now the one carrying it. The look of terror on his face was all I needed to know. He understood, and there was no escaping it. He was pregnant. 9 months later, David was a shadow of the man he used to be. His once proud posture had crumbled under the weight of his massive swollen belly. His skin stretched tight and marked with deep stretch marks. His feet were constantly swollen, and his face, once stern, was now puffy and exhausted from sleepless nights of cramps, back pain, and the relentless discomfort of carrying life inside him. He had gone through every stage of pregnancy: morning sickness that left him heaving, strange cravings, and the unpredictable mood swings that left him either weeping or raging at the smallest things. His body ached in ways he never imagined. His back hunched as he waddled through the house, barely able to move with the burden of his own making. The reality of pregnancy had shattered any last trace of his arrogance, leaving him humbled and broken. What I wonder is that baby human? I'm gonna assume not, and he's gonna give birth to like some weird looking thing. Also, side note, why on earth would they go round for the ritual in the first place? Like, why did the sister just rock up? Like, surely she could have ran away or gone, I don't know, literally anywhere other than the room of the ritual. Seems a bit silly, that one. We now jump into story number 3, titled "Every Other Person at This Party Sees and Hears a Man Named Lucas, but I don't." You might be shouting, "They're just pranking you, dude." That was what I thought when I first arrived. 1 hour later, I'm boxed in an ensuite with nothing at my disposal, but weak phone reception and weaker ideas. I'll make this post brief, as I very much doubt I have a lot of time before the bathroom door parts with the frame, before the formless man makes his way in here. I've already seen him do things that defy explanation. I'm praying that one of you knows how to save me. Please. Aston, Jack joyously announced, greeting me at the door with open arms. He was the only person I knew at the party, but most of the faces in that common room were familiar. I joined a tightly packed cluster of students by the kitchen counter. A circle of 10 people. Once Jack and I had joined the group, 10 people to my eyes, anyway. I know that because I counted each of us again, and again. I wanted to ensure that I hadn't lost my mind after Jack introduced an invisible 11th person wedged between Alexandra and Deegan. And that's Lucas, he said. Still, after 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, I'd forgotten about my friend's gesture towards the empty spot, dismissed it as an odd moment, and I summoned the courage to make conversation with Deegan. "So why did you choose law?" I asked her. Deegan smiled. "Overbearing parents. Dad said I'd be putting my brain to waste if I were to take journalism, but I'm not planning on becoming a lawyer, so I'd call this a bigger waste of time." "That sucks," I said, and she shrugged. "What about you?" I asked the other girl. Alex answered, "Well, unlike Deeks, I do want to be a lawyer, but my story's boring. You should hear why Lucas has taken his course." Then the other visible people in the circle all turned to face that gap between Alexandra and Deegan. Once more I was left dumbfounded. Sure, I'm aware that we're all still young and immature. Everyone at this party is a first-year university student after all, but we hardly know each other. This is a socializing event for freshers, a mixer, whatever you like to call it. And I doubt that so many people would be this cruel. Why would a group of 50-something law students collaborate to torment at random a stranger named Aston? It's not as if I've done anything to warrant such mistreatment. We've only been studying here for a little over a month and I've been sitting quietly in lectures. Those were the thoughts coursing through my mind in a simultaneous jumble, as the other visible folk listened to a silent story. Listened and laughed as an unseen person told them something. Something that they all heard, but I did not. "He cracks me up," Jack whispered to me as members of the group had a one-way conversation with her. I nodded my head slowly, unsure as to what I should say. I must have turned a ghostly shade because my friend frowned at me. "You alright, man?" he asked. "You're usually a bit cheerier than this. Too much pre-drinking before we arrived." I cleared my throat, speaking quietly whilst the others communed with the ghost. "I don't understand this Lucas thing. Is it a game?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? What the hell, Aston, you really are wasted. Maybe have a glass of water or something, pal." Then all eyes in the circle turned to me. There followed an awkward pause and Deegan started to match Jack's frown. "You okay, Aston?" she asked. I nodded, "Yeah, just tired." Deegan nodded. Then she and a few others turned back to the Lucas-shaped hole, the missing link in the chain. A couple of seconds later, those heads had returned to face me, as if waiting for my response. Several members of the circle were scowling at me. "Why are you ignoring him?" a student named Colin asked. "Lucas asked you a question, Aston." I tugged at my shirt, feeling my perspiring neck start to redden. The fabric was coarse, but fear was the thing that had slithered under my collar. Irritated my skin. This wasn't social anxiety. There was something entirely wrong about the room's atmosphere. I'd felt that way before Jack Jack even introduced me to Lucas felt off. Even the dozens of people who weren't standing in the kitchen, weren't making conversation with Lucas, seemed to converse and chortle with an erratic, unstable energy. I caught snippets of conversations that I shouldn't have been able to hear, but every voice in the common room was unbearably loud, and a key word kept spilling out of mouths from all corners of the party. Shrine. Jack was right. I'm often an extroverted, sociable chap, but not tonight. Since showing up at this place, I've felt only the primal urge to run. Listen guys, I eventually said whilst backing out of the circle, I just need some air. As I walked towards the door, I heard a couple of students chuckle at something the invisible, inaudible man had said. I'm sure you'll get your answer eventually, Colin whispered to thin air in an odd tone. Once outside, taking in the crisp autumnal breeze, I seriously considered going home. That was about 30 minutes ago, and I wish I'd just done it. Run for my life. That was my only chance. Things had changed when I re-entered the building. The eerie atmosphere had been polluted with something new. Everything was quiet, not quite silent, but hushed. And the thought of a practical joke, some grand conspiracy to humiliate me, returned to my mind. The possibility that everybody was laughing at me. That would have been simpler, just some light hazing, but I returned to find the 50 or so party guests clumped together, all facing a white wall at one side of the large room, a wall with nothing at all displayed upon it. Jack beckoned me over before lifting a finger to his lips. What's happening now? I whispered. Just watch the film, Jack quietly replied with a heavy whisper. But there was no film, only that empty wall which had transfixed every person in the common room. Chest thumping, I noted that Alexandra, a few rows ahead, was facing the wrong way and twitching vigorously. Her nostrils bled, but that wasn't why I moaned in terror. It was the gunk oozing from her eye sockets. Not blood, but lumpy waves of pinkish grey wrapping around her eyeballs and spilling down her cheeks, as if Alexandra's very brain were itching to escape from her skull. It's not that, I lied to myself, mouth half open in some state of paralysis. Then I began to croak. What the hell is? A hand slapped against my lips, clamping them tightly together, and I turned to find Jack silencing me, though he still looked at the wall ahead, still sobbed and sniffled with joy as he and dozens of others watched an imaginary film at the front of the room. I released a muffled gasp as I noted the trickles of grey spilling from his own orifices. Lucas wants quiet, Jack whispered. I was too frightened to move, too frightened of what the hypnotized members of the crowd might do to me, frightened of my own innards fleeing from my body. Then, after half an hour of watching nothing, there came a new horror from the front of the crowd. Directly in front of me, in the front row of the audience, two side-by-side students crumbled to the ground, their bones shattered, bodies imploded, the sounds of crunching and splashing. I didn't know how else to describe what the hell I just saw. As spectres scrunched their very skeletons inwards like balls of paper. And then the same happened to two audience members in the second row. The third followed. Something was flattening bodies to create a path, parting the crowd and forming a direct line towards me. He asked you a question, Jack groaned. My friend had finally turned to face me. I ran towards the building's still ajar front door. Ran as fast as my legs would carry me, but it was no use. A gust slammed the door shut, and it wouldn't open, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how forcefully I tugged. I was trapped in the hallway. When the crunch of compressing carpet sounded behind me, I stopped rattling the door handle, stopped and turned to see recesses forming in the carpet, the shapes of loafers or misshapen feet. These were the only physical indicators I had seen of Lucas's existence, other than the trail of crumpled corpses and the supernatural door slam. But as he walked towards me, the man's form remained unseen, his voice remained unheard, and I saw only the dozens of partygoers standing in the common room behind him, tightly huddled together, no longer watching Lucas's invisible film on the white wall. Their heads were turned to the right. They were turned towards me. I dashed upstairs. There was no other way past the thing in the corridor, and no escaping out the front door. I entered a hallway with dorm rooms on either side, and I hurriedly tried handle after handle. Stairs creaked below, one after the other, slowly. By some miracle, I eventually found an unlocked room, so I scurried inside and locked the door behind me. That didn't feel safe enough, of course. I locked myself in the ensuite for good measure. I don't know what Lucas asked, don't know what Lucas might be. All I know is that he's still out there, either searching or waiting, and I need help before he finds me. I think death would be more merciful than hearing Lucas's question, than seeing his face. Damn, that was possibly one of the scariest stories that I've read in any of these videos. I don't know why, but that really got me. It was really creepily written, and I like ones that happen in kind of like places you typically associate being safe, like in a common room, like at a party. Yeah, that one really got me. Really got me. Right, on to the next one. Story number 4 is titled, I watched unsecured CCTV cameras on the dark web. Today, I paid the price. Firstly, I apologise for any odd phrasing or typos. For the past couple of days, I've been having trouble eating and I'm feeling pretty light-headed. Sleep also hasn't come easy. Honestly, being behind a computer is probably the last place where I should be, but I need to get this off my chest before I can carry on with my life. We live in a time of constant distraction. Some spend their days with podcasts buzzing in their earbuds. Some calm their minds with a constant stream of all sorts of ASMR scary Reddit stories on YouTube. It's weird. And others make ambience for their apartment with quiet, Netflixed sitcoms. For the past couple of months, my choice of attention dollar has been unsecured CCTV cameras. I'd eat my lunches to feeds from vape shops in Bangladesh or quiet intersections in Stockholm. Working home office has instilled a sense of gentle claustrophobia in me. The live feeds assured me that life existed beyond the 3 rooms of my apartment. For a long time I found those assurances soothing. But then I found the warehouse cam. It was in an unsorted directory and there was no identifying marks in the footage. I was looking at a feed from the side of some warehouse that bordered the edges of an industrial district. The camera was low, but the streets were empty. I'd seen feeds like that before, yet what caught my eye was the gentle snowfall. Beyond the warehouse, there was a forest of pine trees. When I had started my lunch, they were their usual dark green. Yet as I ate, and as the first snow of the season fell, the trees slowly turned heavy with white. The tranquil scene had kept me distracted from my thoughts as I ate, and I was getting ready to search for something new, but then I saw people. A procession, to be precise. At least 36 people dressed in lab coats walked down the road towards the forest in a single file line. They weren't dressed for the cold, and none of them seemed to be pleased with their journey. Yet they walked without pause or stumble. I watched the camera long after the scientists had marched by, hoping for at least a hint of explanation, yet none came. The snow finally stopped falling, and the empty streets and forest became a near static image. I went back to work, but I did bookmark the camera address and took note of the time. The next day, as I took my lunch break, I called the procession once more. They arrived at the exact same time as they did the day prior. More snow had fallen and it covered much of the sidewalk, yet the scientists moved no slower. With faces completely blank of expression and clothes not suited for the winter, the scientists marched through the snow and disappeared into the forest. On the third day, when the snow turned to slush, they marched once more. The people in lab coats made the same trip at the same time every day of the week. Even during the weekend, when I didn't have to be behind my computer, I would attend our scheduled lunch appointment. Every day they walked by, and every day I was there to watch them. I found the mystery of the scientists exhilarating, and its regularity allowed it to be a constant in my days. Even when I wasn't on my lunch break, I would keep the camera feed running on the background of my browser, in hopes of catching a passing car's license plate, or anything else that would help me locate the feed. I wanted to know where the scientists were. I wanted to know who they were, so that I could understand their daily march. Yet no such opportunity presented itself. The nature of the camera feed remained a frustrating mystery. It irritated me. I wanted to know more about the scientists. I was naive back then. I did not realize the comfort that existed in my unknowing. 3 days ago on my lunch break, I was once again counting down the minutes to the usual appearance of the scientists. I'd gotten into the habit of only eating when they finally appeared on screen, and I was quite hungry that day. The moment I saw them, however, I completely lost my sense of appetite. They still marched through the snow of the sidewalk and mud of the forest trail. They still wore their lab coats, and they still moved in their orderly single file without pause. Yet the scientists had changed. They were burnt. They were all horribly burnt. With some, the flesh had slipped off parts of their face and revealed the bone underneath. Others still had eyes and skin, yet the extent of the damage was undoubtedly fatal. None of them should have been capable of walking. None of them should have been alive. I watched my screen with utter shock and disgust. The innocent questions I had about the daily procession of scientists turned into sheer terror. My heart was seized with fear, and my stomach had been thoroughly robbed of all appetite. yet my mind still hungered for knowledge. Knowing that no one would believe me on my word alone, I decided to record the procession the next day. I'd hoped that perhaps with video evidence of the scientists, someone would be able to see something I had missed. The next day, I attempted to record the procession, and it was a grave mistake. Over the months, I had gotten used to the unfriendly weather that would occasionally accompany the scientists. But when I tuned into the feed the following day, there was a snowstorm the strength of which I'd never witnessed before. The sidewalks were engulfed in snow, and the road itself seemed impossible to pass through by car. The weather was horrid, yet the line of burnt scientists still marched. They forced their way through the snow without rest or pause, as they always did. That day, however, as the final scientist of the march passed the camera, they stopped. Their skin was too charred for me to get even an inkling of their identity, yet they clearly stopped and looked at the camera. Slowly, but clearly noticeable on my screen, the scientists shook their head. It was as if they knew I was watching them. Though I was in my warm apartment, looking at the snow-filled scene made me shiver. It wasn't until after the scientists had left, however, that I had felt true fear. I do most of my work on the computer. I've not skimmed on making sure I have a strong rig. A simple screen recording is nothing my machine couldn't handle. Yet when I tried watching back the footage from the procession, the video was a complete slideshow. I tried collecting evidence of the burnt scientists, but all I have is pixelated shots of a snowstorm. When I woke up the next morning, I was committed to making another attempt at capturing the procession. That, however, would not be possible. My internet access had been completely shut off. When I called my ISP to figure out what had happened, I was placed into a 2-hour waiting queue. When I finally managed to talk to a representative, they were cagey. Apparently, my internet had been shut off due to criminal use. Apparently, the police would contact me about the details. I write this post on my phone while sitting at a bistro. I do not know which law I have broken, and I trust the situation with the police will be quickly resolved. Yet I fear staying in my home. I fear that whoever is responsible for that procession of burnt scientists knows my IP address. I write this post on my phone while sitting in a bistro. This place used to be one of my favourite lunch spots whenever I wanted to treat myself for an order in. I've never refused a burger from this place, it's the best in the city. I'm hungry and the air is filled with delightful smells, yet I cannot bring myself to eat. I can't bring myself to eat, because whenever I try, all I can think of is the burnt scientists. You know, this would be a perfect segue into a VPN sponsorship, wouldn't it? Why are you going on the dark web without any form of protection? He said he had a good rig. Surely he's going to have some knowledge about protecting his online identity. So honestly, I hope the burnt scientists find him. Because he deserves it for not taking his internet security seriously, and that's why I use NordVPN. Story number 5 now, and it's titled White Noise, Black Screen. There is a video on YouTube simply titled White Noise, Black screen. It is a 10-hour-long video designed for playing while you're asleep. It stands out among the other white noise videos though because at around the 6-hour mark there is a huge spike in the most replayed section. In case you don't know, most replayed is a feature on YouTube that shows what part of the video other people played over and over again. For most videos it makes sense. On a creepy urban explorers video, the most replayed might be where the person encounters a ghost or creepy person, etc. Or a funny skit video might be the most replayed at the punchline. But for a video that's playing white noise in a black screen for 10 hours, why would there be a most replayed section? But there it was, a 30-second portion of the video at the timestamp 6 hours 18 minutes. Out of curiosity I jumped to that part of the video and played it, but it looked and sounded the same as the rest of the video. Black screen, white noise, no blips in the audio or change to the visuals as far as I could tell. Maybe that's when most people get up. I mean, that was 6 hours of sleep, right? Maybe a lot of people woke up about 6 hours into the video and shut it off. That wouldn't really be replaying it, though. And also, 30 seconds in a 10-hour video was too accurate. Some people would wake up 6 hours in, 6 hours 5 minutes in, etc. The most replayed feature showed a spike at exactly 6:18:14. A huge narrow spike specifically at that time, not a broader hump that would imply a range of wake-up times. Maybe someone linked the video at that time by accident and shared it to a lot of people. Comments were turned on so I couldn't check if people were saying anything else about it. Despite the weirdness, that night I decided to play the video while I slept. That's how I found the video in the first place. I really did need white noise. My neighbour's dog kept barking at 6 AM and I needed the sleep. I pressed play on the video and went to bed, and woke up with a start in the middle of the night. I didn't know what woke me up. My phone said it was 3:37 AM. My room was pitch black except for the dark grey glow of the white noise black screen video playing. I rolled over, pulled the blanket over me and tried to fall back asleep. But my body was pumping with adrenaline. It was like I'd woken up from a nightmare or something, even though I didn't remember having one. I tried to relax, slowly counting in my head, and that's when I heard something else. It's hard to describe, but I'll try. Some white noises are computer generated, so that they truly make a uniform rushing sound the entire time. Others, however, especially in older sound machines, are actually a clip of white noise repeating over and over again. Listening to it long enough, your brain starts to pick out a pattern of the subtly changing tone, and it gets really annoying. That's what this felt like. My brain was suddenly picking out a pattern, a sort of rhythm, to the white noise, even though I hadn't heard it when I fell asleep. The longer I lay there tossing and turning, the more my brain picked up on the pattern, a series of whooshes and clicks. It was really annoying. I'm one of those people who can't sleep in the same room with a ticking clock, and that's what this felt like. Whoosh, whoop, click. Whoosh, whoop, click. My nerves grew ragged. Whoosh, whoop, click. Just when I couldn't stand it anymore, just when I was about to get out of bed and turn it off, because anything, even barking dogs at 6 AM was better than this, I heard it. sound. "Who's there?" I shouted. Nothing. I sat up and my heart dropped. A pair of white eyes floated in the darkness on my computer screen. I watched, frozen as the eyes shifted off the computer screen. They hung in the darkness a full foot away, staring me down. Then it moved. The eyes blazed white as the thing leapt for me, shadowy hands reaching across the bed. A shock of pain as something tightened around my wrist. I scrambled away, kicking, grabbed my phone off the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. Nothing was there. I ran to the door and turned on the lights. The bedroom was empty. I grabbed the laptop and saw that I was just past the 6:18 mark in the video, the most replayed part. I rewound it, replayed it. Nothing was there. No growl, no shadowy figure, no blazing white eyes. I ran to the bathroom and splashed water on my face, trying to calm myself, to break myself out of the panic. It was just a dream, you were half asleep, that's all it was. But when I looked down at my arm, I saw a purple bruise just above my wrist, in the shape of a slender, skeletal hand. Story number 6 is a fairly short one, titled "Count Your Windows Twice Every Night." I didn't. It started with an innocent enough warning from the old man next door. He was a reclusive figure, always dressed in faded flannel and worn-out boots, with grey stubble that covered most of his face like a second layer of skin. Nobody in the neighbourhood ever spoke to him much, but when he saw me locking my door one evening, he shuffled over with a strange urgency in his eyes. "You live alone now, don't you?" His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken to another human in days. "Yeah," I replied, a bit uneasy but polite. "Why?" He leaned in close, his breath hot with the scent of whiskey. "You better count your windows twice every night before bed," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Make sure they're all closed, all locked. If you don't, well, let's just say it ain't good." I chuckled awkwardly, unsure if he was joking or just drunk. "Sure, I'll do that." The old man's expression didn't change. "I'm serious, kid. Count them twice, or they'll come in." I watched as he shuffled back to his house, a creeping unease settling in my gut. They'll come in. What did that even mean? But I shook it off as the ramblings of a lonely old man with a little too much time and liquor on his hands. That night, as I wandered around my house before bed, I found myself thinking about this strange warning. I stood in front of the first window in my bedroom and closed it tightly, then the one in the kitchen. After a second of hesitation, I moved through the house, checking each window carefully just as he had suggested. One in the bathroom, 2 in the living room, each of them shut and locked. When I reached the last one in the hallway, I counted again in my head. 5 windows, all sealed. It felt ridiculous, but I did it anyway. Twice, just like he'd said. Nothing happened that night, of course, but over the next few days I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I noticed subtle things. A draft even though the windows were closed. Strange sounds late at night. And most unsettling, a growing sense of being watched. The next week I came home late from work, exhausted, and I forgot about the old man's warning. I went straight to bed, my body too heavy with fatigue to bother checking the windows. about it until the middle of the night, when I woke to a soft tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it was rain, but the night was dry. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. My heart began to race as I sat up in bed, listening. It was coming from the hallway window, the last one I'd always check. I hesitated, fear gripping me, but curiosity pulled me out of bed. As I approached the hallway, the tapping stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence. My pulse pounded in my ears. The window was closed, of course, it was. But as I reached for the lock, I saw it. A handprint on the glass, not mine. Something else, something that shouldn't be there. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The handprint was too large, too distorted. It pressed against the glass from the outside as though something had been watching me. Frantic, I ran through the house, checking every window, counting them twice, just like the old man had warned. But the windows were all closed, all locked. Yet the feeling that something was wrong persisted, stronger than ever. The next night I made sure to check the windows before bed, counting each one meticulously. 5 windows twice, then I slept. But the tapping came again, this time louder, faster. It wasn't just one window either, it was all of them. A frantic, rhythmic tapping from every room surrounding me. I leapt out of bed, my body trembling with fear. The windows were all shut, yet the tapping would not stop. I backed into the centre of the living room, cold sweat trickling down my spine, and that's when I saw it, the shadow moving just outside the glass. A figure, tall and lanky, with impossibly long limbs and a face that seemed to shift and warp under the dim moonlight. It pressed against the window, its grotesque face turning slowly towards me. Eyes, if you could call them that, met mine, hollow and hungry. The tapping stopped, but the window began to creak. I don't know how long I stood there frozen in terror, but eventually the figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me shaken and breathless. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I rushed to the old man's house, desperate for answers, but when I knocked there was no response. The neighbour told me he'd passed away 3 days ago, right around the time the tapping started. Now I count my windows twice every night. I don't forget anymore, because I know they're still out there, waiting. And if I slip up again, they'll come in. Okay, so our next story certainly sounds like an interesting one. It's titled, "My Friends Found My Dad's OnlyFans Account, and They're Unhealthily Obsessed with His Posts." "Nick, your dad's on OnlyFans. Tom messaged me on Discord. What a way to find out. Of course, I rolled my eyes at first. It just seemed like one of my friend's infantile jokes. A playground insult that might have tickled me when we were younger. I would have taken my oldest friend seriously if it hadn't been for the link I received a moment later. There, Dad, age 54, posed in all of his glory. Not in the nude, thankfully, but far from decent. My father's cover photo depicted him lying provocatively on a faux leopard skin rug, revealing his greasy, matted chest hair through a silk robe of matching black and orange design. was not a pose that his employer would have found appropriate, and even with the knockoff Ray-Bans covering his eyes, I recognised him. That goofy smile, once so endearing, was etched to me. It felt as if the image were cutting my eyes. "What the hell?" I messaged Tom. He replied, "I knew Pete was struggling after your mum left, but mate, that is shit. I've always wanted to see Papa Pete's Kiat," my other friend Simon said. "Shut up," I replied. "What do I do? Do I confront him?" "You should sub," Simon messaged. "Piss off," I said. "He's kind of right, Nick," Tom said. "You need to know what's on there." "No, I really truly don't," I replied. "Then we'll do it," Simon messaged. "We?" Tom asked. "Yeah, Tom, I'll need your emotional support and a bottle of bleach after combing through all of those photos and videos. We'll take it in turns. I look at a post, then you look at a post," Simon suggested. "Pete has thousands of nudes. His account dates back to 2020. How about you look at the first photo? Let us know the damage. Then I'll subscribe if you want to share the burden," Tom asked Simon. "Already seen it," my other friend replied. "It was weird." "WTF, you subscribed without telling me," I messaged, feeling betrayed. "Sorry, Nick," Simon apologised. "Curiosity got the best of me. But don't worry, I didn't see your dad's pecker or hole." "Jesus," I replied, "please don't ever say those words again. Don't send the photo, please, but describe it." "It was worse than a nude," my friend said. "Your dad was licking what looked like a wax arm, and he wore a badge attached to his lapel labelled Mr. Morphophilia. I googled that word. Pete has a fetish for deformed people." "Oh, that's not so bad," Tom messaged. "I was expecting worse. No offence, Nick, but it was kind of a given that your dad was into freaky stuff. He's an OF creator." "Pete's page is insane," Simon said. "His fans are unhinged, Nick. They're commenting all sorts of degenerate things. I mean, fair play to him, he's got a devoted following. But he might want to get some security because the subscribers are a little too into him. They're giving me psycho vibes. Want me to send some screenshots?" I said nothing in response. I closed my laptop, curled into a ball under my duvet, and hoped I would awake hours later to find that the whole thing had been a bad dream, or that my friends had fooled me. Created some convincing AI images of my father. Still, I knew them, and I knew that level of Simon and Tom foolery, as I often called it, was beneath them. I woke up around 5 AM, having only managed to get 3 hours of sleep, and when I opened my laptop, I saw that my friends had continued messaging each other, continued conducting their research. I subscribed, Tom said. "Hell, the next photo is worse." "I know," Simon messaged. "You've seen it. I thought we were going to take it in turns. You know, look at alternating posts to save our sanity," Tom messaged. "Yeah," Simon said. "I get it," Tom messaged. "I feel it too, Nick. I hate to say it, but this is legitimately beautiful. Simon, did you watch the video Pete posted a week ago? Next effing level." "I know," Simon said. "I think I recognise that girl," Tom said. "She was in my class at university." "No spoilers," Simon said. "Let's wait until Nick wakes up." "No spoilers," Tom agreed. My God, I've not felt this way in a long time. And there was a gap of 1 hour without any exchange of messages. I hoped that my friends would have changed the topic after the initial unsettling flurry of opinions on my father's OnlyFans content. Hoped they would have said something to remind me that they were my friends. But they didn't, and they weren't. This wasn't some practical joke. I knew Tom and Simon well, and this wasn't them. Their conversation resumed around 4 AM. It started with a short clip that Tom had attached, and I wish I hadn't played it. The video opened with a shaky shot of my friend's desk. "Hello, Nick," he said, gleefully giggling behind the camera. On Tom's monitor, I caught a glimpse of Dad's OF page for a moment. Peeked over the paywall and felt a pang of agony. The same sensation that I'd felt upon eyeing his cover photo, but twice as painful. Even through a phone's camera, an image of an image. Given the change in my friends, I dread to think what gazing directly upon my father's post would have done to my mind. I don't think I want to know. But it was clear that Tom and Simon had seen something which fundamentally altered their very souls. That flicker of the computer screen, fortunately too hazy to distinguish, seared more than my eyes. It seared my skin from top to toes, stopping just shy of consuming more than my physical form. I screamed, feeling some unbound force trying to untether my mind from my body. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I knew it was the same thing, on a lesser scale, that had happened to my friends. Perhaps Dad had brewed the perfect combination of pixels to hypnotise folk into parting with their money. Perhaps he'd been consumed by something beyond earthly explanation. I still don't have an answer. "I want you to understand, Nick," Tom continued, moving a kitchen knife on his desk into view. "I want you to see that your dad has done a beautiful thing. I'm going to be a part of that thing." I trembled as I realised what was about to happen. My friend placed the camera on the desk, making sure he was in shot. There were no theatrics, no pause, no grand monologue. He seemed to be hurrying, and that was what made it all the more awful. Tom didn't utter a sound as he sawed through his right arm, a sound that even my piercing shriek didn't drown. His calm demeanour, whilst enduring such pain, almost made me doubt the validity of the footage. But his face was finally in frame, and it told me that this was real. There was no faking his ghastly smile, accompanied by tearful, jubilant eyes. That wasn't my friend. With the awful squelch of innards and sharp cracking of bone, my friend's forearm came loose, came free like pulled pork just below the elbow joint. Tom released a triumphant roar as his blade met the blood-soaked wood below. Then he let his severance instrument splash into the growing pool. My friend was shivering not with agony, but primal delight as he lifted the dismembered limb with his remaining hand, lifting the bloody appendage towards the camera. The video ended there. My face was painted with snot and tears, and I was struggling to breathe through sharp intakes and releases. Through a throat hoarse from screaming. That was why, when I saw a Discord message from Simon had been removed, I felt relieved. I don't know what my other friends sent, but if it were anything like Tom's video, I wouldn't have wanted to see it. However, the final 3 messages brought my teeth together. "Nick isn't ready for mine," Simon messaged. "No," Tom replied. "He isn't, but he felt it for a moment. Felt what we feel. And he felt it for free, Simon, for free. What a gift. Do you think Daddy wants him to see?" "I think Daddy wants all of us to see," my other friend said. My garden's motion lighting suddenly sprang to life, and less than a moment later, a rock punctured my bedroom window, tore like a bullet into my room, leaving glass shards on my duvet everlasting jolt of fear in my chest. Quivering, I shuffled along the bed, then peered around the edge of the window frame, something I immediately regretted. In the garden, stark naked, were Tom and Simon. Without clothes to hide behind, there was no fudging the facts. Under the bright white glare of the garden's lighting, no practical effects would have explained the dismemberment of my two friends. Tom stood, right arm absent, with his remaining hand gripping the left handle of the wheelbarrow below, and lying in that cart, like a bloody mound of mulch and brambles, was the still-moving body of Simon. A living, breathing body without arms and legs, a torso immobilized, but somehow more alive than ever. Even from the top window of my home I saw the smile on Simon's face, a face coated in trails of blood from the eyes he had plucked from their sockets. "Nick," Tom called from below, "I see you." Simon yelled something incoherent, opening his mouth wide to reveal that he also lacked a tongue. "Simon says it's time for you to see Daddy's page," Tom shouted, before pushing the wheelbarrow towards the patio doors. I yelled at the sound of shattering glass, then I hurriedly slipped into my joggers. I did not run towards the front door, as I knew I would only meet my two unhinged friends. I tore open the bedroom window, ignoring Tom's delirious cackles as he dashed through my house, and I reached towards the trellis of my rear wall, an exterior feature I was glad to have installed the summer before. "I'm going to have to leave you here for a moment," Tom said to Simon. I heard my other friend release a series of giddy, unintelligible murmurs, the hauntingly happy moans and groans of a man trying to speak without the means to do so. Stairs creaked rapidly, and I screamed as I hurled my body out of the window, fingers weaving through the crisscross structure. The wooden framework of the trellis bent and strained under my weight, working fiercely to cling to the wall. I descended at a great pace before my makeshift ladder decided to clog out, and halfway down, Tom's bare upper body burst through my bedroom window. He swung an arm on a severed stump in my direction, and if he hadn't dismembered himself, my once friend may well have seized me. But I made it to the safety of the paving slabs below, and then I fled. I still want to see Dad. I want to know what he did to the 3,789 people subscribed to his OnlyFans. We've barely spoken in 2 years, so I don't pretend to know him anymore, but this doesn't sound like the man I know. I don't understand why my own father would convince thousands of people to do such unthinkably odious things to themselves. I might never have known my dad at all. Maybe he's always been this way. Maybe something has changed him, much as it had changed my friends. I don't understand any of it. I don't know who my father has become. Interesting. I mean, this top reply says, "Damn, your dad must be a fine, foxy man if he's making people want to dismember themselves." There was a link at the end of this story, but people were just disappointed that it wasn't a link to the OnlyFans. That would have been a nice touch, I guess. Our next story is titled Polaroid Man. Polaroid Man. I didn't understand the object Freddy shook in my face or why he was so excited. Halloween 1987 wasn't as illuminated as today. "It's a picture," he yelled and spat into my face. "Look, look." I put my pillowcase down and held his wrist gently to see the fuss. A Polaroid picture with Freddy in his sad pirate costume. When I looked more closely, however, I saw the singed boy beneath. Polaroid Freddy looked burnt to a crisp, his skin gone haze melted away. Freddy snapped the picture from my fingers. Isn't it cool? He studied it again. Like a magic trick. Best Halloween ever, right? It's cool, right? He continued to bully me for validation as 10-year-old boys do until I relented. It's cool, Freddy. Where did you get it? You know Mr. Malcolm's house. Super green lawn guy tells dirty jokes to us at the bus stop. The weirdo pervert, that guy. Freddy nodded enthusiastically, missing my intended sarcasm. Everyone usually avoided Mr. Malcolm's house on Halloween and every other day. The man constantly invited kids inside for candy and conversation. I don't know if anyone accepted that offer. I hope not. Yeah, Freddy confirmed, but there's a young guy on the porch. Probably his nephew or something. He's got on a mega spooky demon mask and he's got a camera. And he takes your picture and it prints out all freaky like mine and, whoa Freddy, I interjected. He was getting overexcited. Freddy had something wrong with him. A weak heart maybe, though I can't recall exactly what we were told. Other than he could die, should he get too worked up. Our teachers told us to look out for Freddy, so I did. It's great, calm down. I started breathing with him and held his hand. He smiled. Thanks man, wanna see? I smiled back. Yup, the photo had creeped me out, but also fascinated me. I didn't want to be the only kid who missed out on something cool. Judging by the line extending down the walkway, bending at a right angle onto the sidewalk, it seemed I might. There had to be 50 kids waiting for their photo. Polaroid pictures aren't fast. They don't present an image until at least 10 minutes have gone by. The guy on the porch wore a thin mask with horns that really seemed to grow from his forehead. A mouthpiece displayed jagged teeth. He carefully placed the undeveloped photo on a shoe rack at his side. You don't shake Polaroid pictures. You wait. And so we waited. He could have simply given the white rectangles to the eager kids before the image showed, but he didn't. Instead, after taking a trick-or-treater's photo, he sat cross-legged on Mr. Malcolm's concrete slab of a porch and stared at the child. Some kids tried to talk with him. He didn't answer. Others waited in silence, bearing the stranger's gaze with admirable defiance. One little boy began to cry. His parents ushered him away before he could collect his photo. I remember thinking how fortunate I was that my parents let me trick-or-treat on my own. I would get my photo. I would enjoy the awkwardness of the adult gaze. Time ticked on. It was late. Some kids gave up and left the line to my delight. Freddy yawned and said he had to go. I thanked him for telling me about the Polaroid man. I probably wouldn't have come down Ferry Street otherwise. Mr. Malcolm creeped me out too much. Luckily, a few other school friends were revealed by the departures. Maida, Franco and Vicky ran. They'd already gotten their photos, but hung around because May's little sister wanted one too. Can I see? I asked, pointing at the photos. They were grotesque and I could hardly bear it. May's body appeared popped open, entrails spilling from her guts and onto splintered remnants of bone and muscle. Only the pink princess dress she wore as her costume identified her as the corpse in the photo. Vicky's was far worse. Her dead body had been tied at the wrists and ankles. Her pale face appeared stunned at the mutilation of her body. The top half had been pulled apart from the bottom, and there were more tortured dead around her in a dark field. Cool, right, Vicky said. It's like Freddy Krueger or something. You've never seen Freddy Krueger, May said. I hadn't seen Nightmare on Elm Street either. I never have. At the time, I assumed the contents of the photo were typical horror movie stuff. I wasn't ready for it, but I wouldn't let my discomfort show. After May's sister got our photo, more kids thought better of risking their worried parents' wrath. They left, and after one more boy got his photo, my turn came at 11:42 p.m. My parents were probably annoyed by 8, so I figured wrongly I wouldn't be in more trouble for continuing to stay out way past the time I should have been home. Though I did have second thoughts, especially when I realised no other kids remained. I would be the last, and I was alone with the devil-masked man. "Don't smile," he growled. I adjusted my face quickly to obey. He snapped the picture and sat on the stoop. We waited. The last leaves on the trees hissed a warning in the wind. Their dead brethren skidded away down Berry Street. I could hardly breathe as he stared. There were no visible eyes in the sockets of his mask, only oily voids, an unfortunate trick of the dim porch bulb. It had to be. The feeling in my stomach called for a quick escape. "I think I need to go," I told him. His hand gripped my wrist hard. I squirmed. "It's okay, I can pick it up tomorrow." He did not let me go. His face, that mask, got close to mine. He was perfectly quiet. No inhalation or exhale as he forced me to stay put. "Please," I begged. "I want to go home." In the half-inch space between our noses, he slid the developing Polaroid. This close, I could barely see anything. Then the devil's mask appeared in the photo. Then I, or what would become of me, materialized. The Polaroid featured us together, his hands around my neck, my face empty of life. I yelped and pulled away. He let go and I fell onto the walkway. He stood up and tossed the photo with precision. It landed beside me on the grass. Further details of the horror were revealed. A swath of blood matted my hair and soaked the front of my costume like a gory bib. The man in the devil mask had done more than strangle me according to the image. I backed away, a reverse grab walk of compass and doom. He had a move because he could catch me any time he liked. His first step knocked his camera off the stoop. It clattered and a piece shot away from the impact. He didn't seem to care. "But please," I pleaded with him. I don't remember the specifics of how I got up and ran down the middle of Ferry Street. I only recall the chase was brief because I made a mistake and got cornered in the variety store parking lot. The store, Brothers Variety, had been closed for hours. There'd be no help there. The streets were empty and most people were asleep. How I knew this or thought about it in such a terrible moment came down to dumb luck. I backed into a pile of leaves bunched up with fake spider webs that had blown off someone's house. Stuck. I raised my arms defensively and caught the time on my digital watch. The wrong side of midnight by 12 minutes. His fingers caressed the sides of my neck. I closed my eyes and started trembling uncontrollably. Pain would be next. Great pain, the photo promised. And death. No, I tried to shout, but it came out like a squeak. Halloween is over, it's done, you can't. I don't know what I was saying or why. But the fingers retreated, and he took noiseless steps backwards over the cracked tarmac. When he reached the sidewalk he spoke. "See you next year then." As if it had been a prank all along. He walked away, casually. It took far too long for me to go the opposite way. Eventually I managed a slow jog, working through punishment was left up to my father. When he returned from searching for me, I told him about the photo and the guy in the mask. He received the information passively before grabbing his baseball bat and calling his brothers. Together they went to Mr. Malcolm's and discovered the busted door in the backyard. The old man had died in his chair, completely naked. My dad told me this last detail some years later. Police were called, but nothing came of whatever investigation might have followed. My parents had and have no faith in the Bridal Veil Lake PD, hence the reason he called his brothers and picked up his bat that night. Evidence of the Devil Masked Man existed, of course. Many kids had their photos taken. No police or adults asked about it as far as I know. Mine had been left on Mr. Malcolm's lawn, but Freddie, May and Vicky said they still had theirs at home. Freddie's, however, likely burned up in the fire the following Christmas. His dad made the mistake of using a space heater in the garage. All of them, including Freddie, were dead the day before Christmas Eve. I refused to go trick-or-treating the next year, and everyone after that. My parents understood and didn't pressure me. Within a few years I aged out of the tradition, but still wouldn't risk going out for a walk on Halloween night. See you next year then, and if not, the next, or the next, or the next. He waits. I know because every photo has turned out to be true. Vicky simply disappeared before her 19th birthday, and while her body was never recovered, a man suspected of torturing and killing half a dozen young women was arrested as the likely culprit. May committed suicide off the old hotel casino last July. My son is 5 now, and he wants me to take him trick-or-treating in a few weeks. Of course he does. He doesn't know, neither does my wife. That man is waiting for me. Next story is titled, I Found a Priest's Diary from 1910. The contents of it haunt me to this day. I've been working for a cleaning company for a couple of years now, and you see some weird stuff, but nothing compares to what happened at the old Fisher house. The memory of that day still crawls under my skin, and sometimes I wonder if I'll ever shake the feeling that something is watching me. Something dark. It started like any other job. Mrs. Fisher had passed away a few weeks ago, and her family wanted the place cleaned up so they could sell it. The house was big, a dusty old thing in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to swallow up the sunlight. It was one of those places that immediately felt wrong the moment you stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the smell of rot and neglect. Every step I took out the creaky wooden floors echoed through the empty rooms, the only other sound being the wind outside rattling the broken windows. I started in the living room, wiping down furniture and sweeping the floor, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. It was in one of the upstairs bedrooms where I found it, a small leather-bound diary tucked under a loose floorboard. The diary looked ancient, the pages yellowed and brittle, the leather cracked from age. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just some old family keepsake. But when I opened it, something changed in the air around me. The first page was written in shaky, old-fashioned handwriting dated July 12, 1910. It was signed by a priest named Father Augustine. His words were strange, like he was documenting something terrible that had happened. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, I write this to recount the horrors that befell the Church of St. Cuthbert, for my soul will never rest until the truth is known. I kept reading, feeling a shiver crawl tingle at my spine. It began with the children, their laughter twisted into screams and their eyes turned black as night. One by one they fell to the curse, speaking in tongues, writhing like serpents upon the ground. At first we thought it was a sickness, but it was not of this world. It was the work of the devil himself. The room suddenly felt colder, and I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But the house was empty. I was alone. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to keep reading. I was called to the village when the first child died, her body twisted in unnatural ways, her mouth open in a silent scream. The villagers whispered of demons, of something unholy that had come to our land. I did not believe them. I was a man of God. I was a fool. The first exorcism failed. Deus in auditorium meum intende. The words of the ritual did nothing. The child laughed, a laugh that was not her own. She spoke to me in the voice of 1,000 serpents, mocking God, mocking my faith. And then she died, her body turning cold and stiff in my arms. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. A creeping sense of dread that was getting harder to ignore. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know more. I opened the diary again, flipping through the pages. The priest's handwriting grew more frantic as the entries went on. His Latin prayers scattered throughout the text, as if he were desperately trying to cling to his faith. I've seen the face of evil. It wears the skin of the innocent, but its soul is black. The demon is no longer in one body. It moves through the village like a plague, corrupting, consuming. I tried to perform another exorcism tonight. It went wrong. So very, very wrong. Demonisme circumdederant. The demon was stronger than I could have imagined. It spoke my name. It knew me. It taunted me, saying it had been waiting for me. I could feel its presence in the room, crawling beneath my skin, filling the air with its stench. Suddenly, I heard a soft creak behind me. I jumped, the diary slipping from my hands and falling to the floor. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, but the room was still empty. The shadow seemed to shift though, moving in ways that didn't feel right. It was like something was here, with me. I picked up the diary again, my hand shaking. I wanted to stop reading, but something was pulling me in, like the words had a power of their own. I flipped to the last entry, dated October 31st, 1910. The village is lost. The demon has claimed them all. Men, women, children. It moves through them like a plague, leaving only death and madness in its wake. I hear its voice in my sleep now. It whispers to me, calls to me. I know what I must do. This is no longer a battle of faith. This is survival. I will confront it tonight. Fiat voluntas tua. If these are my last words, let it be known that I fought, though I fear I fight in vain. The last line was written in shaky, barely legible script. I hear it now. It is coming for me. As soon as I finished reading, the wind picked up outside, howling against the windows. The house groaned, the floorboards creaking as if something heavy was moving through the halls. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and every instinct told me to run. But my legs things started. They were soft at first, like the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, but they grew louder, more insistent. Words I couldn't understand, spoken in a language that made my skin crawl. The same language that Father Augustine had written in Demonis ad Devenient. The room seemed to darken, the shadow stretching across the walls, twisting and writhing like something alive. My heart pounded in my chest and I backed toward the door, clutching the diary like it was my only lifeline. But then I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, a figure stood. It was tall, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes black and empty. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and malevolent. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the thing in the corner. Then it smiled. The smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face in half, revealing rows of sharp, blackened teeth. And then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp that seemed to echo inside my head. Fiat voluntas tua. I bolted. I ran faster than I've ever run before, down the stairs, through the darkened halls, out the front door. I didn't stop until I was in my car, slamming the door behind me and fumbling for the keys. The house loomed in my rearview mirror as I sped away, its dark windows staring after me like eyes. I never went back to the Fisher house. I quit my job the next day, moved to a new town, tried to forget everything I'd read in that diary, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. The whispers still come at night, creeping into the edges of my dreams, filling my mind with dark, ancient words I don't understand. And right now as I'm writing this, I feel like I'm being watched, like there's something standing in the corner of that room, smiling. I hear it now. It is coming for me. And our final story this evening is titled My Sister Died, But She Didn't Leave. My little sister Ella died a year ago. She was only 12. The doctor said it was natural causes, but there was nothing natural about what happened to her. The truth is, our family killed her, slowly over years of cruelty. It wasn't sudden, but a slow, deliberate breakdown of her spirit, of her soul. They broke her. Our father died when we were young, and my sister and I were taken in by his side of the family. It was supposed to be temporary until our mother could get back on her feet, but it wasn't. Ella suffered the most. My father's family, my uncle, aunt and cousins, hated us, and they hated her. They were monsters, but they wore the faces of family. The worst part, I couldn't do anything to stop it. I tried to protect Ella, but I was just a kid too. She'd get locked in the basement for days, the door clicking shut behind her while my aunt turned the key with a smile. Sometimes they'd forget to feed her. Other times they'd do it on purpose. It wasn't just the physical abuse, it was the torment. The things they said to her, they loved to make her feel small, powerless. I remember seeing her eyes when they told her she wasn't worth anything, that no one would miss her if she disappeared. Her eyes went empty, dead. I didn't realise that in a way she had already died long before her heart had stopped. Ella's death was a relief to them, a way to erase their guilt and bury their sins. I think they believed deep down that once she was gone, all the things they had done would be buried with her. They never expected what would happen next. At the funeral, something She hadn't cried since the day Ella died. I watched her walk up to the casket, her hands trembling as she touched Ella's cold face. For a moment, it looked like she was about to break down, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned over Ella's still body and whispered something into her ear. I wasn't close enough to hear it, but I saw the look in her eyes. I'll never forget that look. It was unsettling, like she was speaking to someone she knew would hear, someone who wasn't really gone. Later that night I asked her what she whispered. At first, she didn't answer. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. But then in a voice that was barely a whisper, she told me, I told her to avenge me. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I thought it was just her grief talking. After all, the family had taken everything from us. I thought she was just angry, broken. But now looking back, I realise it was something much darker. The first sign something was wrong happened the night after the funeral. It started with the sound. It was subtle at first, soft whispers that seemed to come from the walls, like distant voices carried on the wind. But the house was still, there was no wind. I remember standing in the hallway holding my breath listening. It wasn't random noise, it was too clear, too deliberate. You know what you did. At first I thought it was my imagination. I told myself I was just hearing things, but the whispers grew louder each night. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside the house, crawling through the cracks in the walls, echoing in the corners. Sometimes I'd catch a word or two, but other times it was just the soft, almost bleeding sound of a voice I couldn't quite place. But the others heard it too. My uncle, the cruelest of them all, was the first to crack. He began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, screaming about seeing something in his room. He swore that Ella was standing at the foot of his bed, watching him. She's not gone, he'd mutter to himself during the day, pacing back and forth. His eyes were wild, sunken, like he hadn't slept in weeks. She's still here. No one believed him. They thought he was losing his mind, but I believed him, because I saw her too. It started small. Out of the corner of my eye I'd catch glimpses of her just for a second, standing in doorways or reflected in windows. She was never close, never fully there, but it was her. I know it was. Her face was pale, hollow, and her eyes, they weren't the same. They were dark, like empty pits staring back at me. Her expression never changed. It was like she was waiting for something, or someone. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew Ella wasn't resting. She was waiting. Then the scratches started. It was late one night when I heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound like nails dragging across the walls. It came from inside the house, from the basement where they used to lock her away. I wanted to believe it was a rat or maybe just the house settling, but when I went downstairs to check, I found something much worse. The walls were covered in deep scratches, gouged into the plaster, as if something or someone had been clawing at it, trying to escape. But that wasn't the worst part. Above the scratches, carved in some jagged lines, were words. Words I knew weren't there before. You will pay. My uncle was the first to die. They said he fell down the stairs in the middle of the night. was a tragic accident. But I know what really happened. I saw his face before they covered it up. His eyes were wide open, filled with terror, as if he had seen something. Something that shouldn't have been there. After he died, things escalated. The whispers became louder, more insistent. The footsteps started, slow, deliberate, like someone walking through the house in the dead of the night. Every time they happened, I would freeze, listening, praying it would stop, but it never did. My aunt, who had locked Ella in the basement so many times, began hearing voices. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but the whispers followed her everywhere, in the bathroom, in her bedroom, and even in her car. Always the same voice. Always Ella. She begged for it to stop, but it didn't. She started sleeping with the lights on, but that didn't help either. One morning I found her sitting on the floor of her room, her eyes wide and vacant, mumbling to herself. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't respond. All she did was repeat the same phrase over and over. She's coming for me. She's coming for all of us. The rest of the family didn't fare much better. My cousins, once so full of life, started looking hollow and gaunt. They hardly spoke anymore, their eyes darting around the house as if they were waiting for something. I knew what they were waiting for. Ella. It was only a matter of time before she came for them too. And then there's me. I thought I'd be spared, that Ella wouldn't come for me because I tried to protect her. I wasn't like the others, I loved her. But lately I've been hearing something too. At first it was just a whisper in the dark, something I could ignore. But now it's louder, clearer. I hear it in my dreams, and sometimes I wake in the middle of the night with the feeling that something is standing over me. Last night I woke up to find a message scratched into the wall beside my bed. I'm coming, and I know she is. I think it's maybe a little unfair that the sister gets murdered as well, like she said, like she was pretty powerless to stop them. But maybe that thing isn't really Ella. I kind of doubt that it is. But yeah, guys, that was 2 hours of scary Reddit stories. I had to film this in 2 parts, but surprisingly didn't actually feel that long, so maybe we'll do more 2-hour videos in the future. If you could leave a like on this video, that would be greatly appreciated. But once again, happy Halloween. I hope you enjoyed the content over the last couple of weeks. And realistically, we'll probably be back in a few weeks with more scary stories, because I know you guys love them. But yes, that is it for tonight's video, so please do leave a like if you're able to. Subscribe